There are moments in history when a single voice stands up and reminds the world of a truth we should have recognized long ago. And today, that voice belongs to President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, a young leader whose message is resonating far beyond the borders of Africa, reaching audiences across America and throughout the global community. In a world overflowing with noise, political speeches, and empty promises, his words broke through with a clarity that was almost unsettling. He did not speak about war or economics or the predictable struggles of geopolitics. Instead, he asked the world a question we have avoided for far too long. Why does the world still look at African women with pity when they are the very foundation that keeps their nations alive? This is not just another speech. It is a declaration, a challenge, and a reminder that the story of Africa's future cannot be told without honoring the strength of its women. In the next few minutes, we will walk through the heart of his message, why it shook audiences, why it matters to the United States, and why it might just redefine how we talk about Africa in the years to come. If you believe Africa's awakening has already begun, feel free to subscribe and stay with me until the end of this story. When President Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the stage to deliver his message, he did not begin with statistics, political critiques, or diplomatic language. He began with something far more powerful, his own story. He spoke not as the head of state of Burkina Faso, but as a man raised by a mother who lived without electricity, without running water, and without the security many of us in the West take for granted. By starting from the ground level of human experience, he grounded his message in a truth that transcends borders. Strength often grows in the harshest places. From that foundation, he delivered the core of his argument. Women in Africa bear the heaviest burdens, yet remain the least empowered. This, he explained, is the contradiction at the heart of the continent's struggle. Women till the land, raise the children, uphold traditions, endure droughts, fight poverty, survive epidemics, and navigate the impacts of conflict. And yet, they receive the least education, hold the fewest leadership positions, and are routinely excluded from decision-making. But Traoré did not frame these women as victims. Instead, he portrayed them as quiet pillars holding entire communities together. He reminded the world that development is not merely a matter of roads, technology, and investment. It is, first and foremost, a matter of human potential. And half of that potential remains locked away when women are denied their rightful place in the conversation. Traoré's message is not about guilt. It is about responsibility, ours and theirs. He argued that if Africa truly seeks sovereignty and self-determination, it cannot continue sidelining the very people who shape the next generation within their homes. He made it clear that the silence surrounding women is not a cultural tradition, it is an obstacle to national progress. And as his words echoed across media outlets and social platforms, a realization began to take form. If the women of Africa rise, the continent rises with them. But that truth is only the beginning, because what came next in his speech shifted the tone from acknowledgement to transformation. As President Ibrahim Traoré continued speaking, the atmosphere shifted. What began as a reflection on hardship became something much larger, a confrontation with the way the world has been conditioned to see Africa. And it was in this moment that he delivered the turning point of his entire message. African women are not weak, they are gifted, they are capable, and they are the silent architects of our strongest communities. With these words, the audience grew quiet. It was not a statement meant to inspire polite applause. It was meant to challenge global assumptions. For decades, media portrayals, especially in major outlets followed by Western audiences, have often shown African women as victims of poverty, violence, or crisis. Rarely are they portrayed as leaders, thinkers, innovators, or community builders. This is why Traoré's declaration struck so deeply. He wasn't just redefining gender roles in Burkina Faso, he was reframing the narrative for an entire continent and for every viewer following the conversation through African news, social media, and global press coverage. He reminded listeners of something profound. Women do not simply support African society, they hold it together. They are the ones who keep families fed when crops fail. They are the ones who uphold culture when wars attempt to erase it. They are the ones who raise the children who will determine Africa's future. And in many villages, it is the women, not the men, who sustain the local economy through trade, farming, and community organization. By naming this truth out loud, Traoré shattered a long-standing silence. He elevated African women from the margins of development conversations to the center of Africa's future. And for many observers, especially those watching from abroad, this shift was startling, even uncomfortable, because it forces a re-evaluation of deeply ingrained stereotypes. But Traoré did not stop there. He pushed the world to recognize that Africa's greatest untapped power is not its minerals, not its youth population, not its geography, but its women. And as his message gained momentum, the reaction across Burkina Faso and the wider African media landscape took on a life of its own. The ripple effect of President Ibrahim Traoré's message was immediate. Inside Burkina Faso, the speech did not land as a simple tribute to women, it was received as a national awakening. Many citizens, especially young people, felt that Traoré had put into words something they had long believed but never heard from a head of state: that women are not merely participants in society, but the stabilizing force that keeps the country alive. Across villages, community groups, and urban centers, clips of his speech circulated widely. Women's associations praised the message as a step toward long-overdue recognition. Men, especially older generations, reacted with a mixture of pride and introspection. For some, it was the first time they had been publicly challenged to rethink how they viewed the women in their own families. But it was on regional platforms like Africa News that the speech gained unstoppable momentum. Commentators across West Africa described the moment as a redefinition of African leadership. They noted that while many leaders speak about development in terms of roads and foreign investments, Traoré centered his strategy on human dignity, a rare and powerful shift. International observers took notice. Analysts in Europe and the United States pointed out the boldness of framing gender equality not as a moral plea, but as a strategic necessity for national progress. Western media outlets, often quick to highlight instability in the Sahel, found themselves covering something different: an African president elevating women as the core of national renewal. Some commentators openly admitted that global narratives about Africa, especially narratives told to American and European audiences, have overlooked the leadership and resilience of African women. Traoré's speech forced uncomfortable reflection. Perhaps the world had been looking at Africa through the wrong lens all along. For many people watching from abroad, including viewers in the United States who follow African news closely, it felt like a challenge to re-evaluate long-held assumptions. The speech sparked debates on social media, podcasts, and academic circles about the future role of African women in shaping political stability, economic development, and cultural identity. And this growing wave of reaction leads us to an even deeper question: what are the real social and political consequences when an entire nation begins to reimagine the power of its women? When a national leader speaks with conviction, the impact often spreads far beyond the walls of a conference hall. And for Burkina Faso, the consequences of President Ibrahim Traoré's message extended directly into the lives of ordinary people, especially the women who had long carried the country's burdens quietly. One of the first visible shifts appeared in the way communities began talking about education. His reminder that many African women had been denied learning opportunities sparked renewed conversations among families and village councils. Mothers who once hesitated to send their daughters to school suddenly felt validated. Fathers who prioritized work over education for girls began reconsidering their decisions. Teachers reported that young girls were raising their hands more confidently, believing that their voices mattered because their president had said so publicly. There was also a transformation in how women viewed their own roles. For years, many accepted silence as a cultural expectation. But after Traoré's speech, women's groups across Burkina Faso described a rise in local activism, nothing ideological or confrontational, but a quiet, powerful sense of self-assertion. Women began organizing literacy circles, petitioning for better school conditions, and participating more actively in village decision-making. And when a society redefines the place of women, it redefines its future. Local economies started feeling the change too. In rural markets, women who often control agricultural trade reported that buyers and community leaders treated them with more respect. Conversations about microfinance and women-led cooperatives re-emerged, inspired by the idea that empowering women strengthens food stability, household income, and community resilience. These are not abstract results. They are measurable, tangible shifts in daily life. Even development researchers following Africa news coverage noted that the president's message had triggered what they called a social recalibration, a subtle yet unmistakable realignment of how citizens perceive dignity, responsibility, and national identity. Most importantly, Traoré's message planted a seed that continues to grow. The belief that women are not simply participants in Burkina Faso's society, they are its stabilizers, its innovators, and the first architects of every generation to come. But these social transformations are only one side of the story. The political and security consequences of this shift are even more profound, and they reveal why this message matters far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. While the social impact of President Ibrahim Traoré's speech was significant, the political and security implications were even more profound. Within Burkina Faso, analysts began noting that the message was not only a moral call, it was a structural challenge to long-standing governance habits across the Sahel. Traoré implicitly argued that no nation can strengthen its institutions while ignoring the very people who hold families, communities, and local economies together. Political observers quickly recognized that empowering women is not simply a matter of fairness, it is a matter of national stability. Studies repeatedly show that when women are educated, communities become less vulnerable to extremist recruitment, ethnic tensions decline, and local conflicts become easier to resolve. This is particularly important for a nation like Burkina Faso, where security pressures have shaped nearly every domestic decision. Internal ministries responded to the speech by reassessing local development programs. Civil society organizations reported that discussions around women's leadership began to surface not only in villages, but also in administrative offices traditionally dominated by men. A new emphasis emerged. If women are central to the fabric of the community, they must also be central to decision-making at the district and regional level. International partners watching through Africa news coverage drew the same conclusion. For years, many global institutions approached Burkina Faso and the broader Sahel through the lens of military aid or economic assistance. Traoré's speech signaled a different approach, one that places human dignity, especially women's dignity, at the core of national resilience. Several analysts in the United States observed that this perspective aligns with long-standing research, showing that nations which elevate women are statistically more stable, more democratic, and more capable of long-term growth. Moreover, the political narrative shifted. Women were no longer being discussed as beneficiaries of policy, but as stakeholders of national security. This reframing challenged traditional elites who were accustomed to women being silent in political spaces. Yet, it also energized younger generations, especially educated women, who saw in Traoré's words a pathway toward new leadership roles in municipal councils, advocacy groups, and social initiatives. In essence, Traoré reshaped the conversation from "should women be included" to "a nation cannot survive without them." And in a region struggling with instability, that shift is not symbolic, it is strategic. But the resonance of this message goes far beyond Burkina Faso. The next question is, how does the United States and the wider world interpret this moment, and why does it matter to them? For many Americans, especially viewers over 40 who follow international developments with a deeper sense of history, the speech by President Ibrahim Traoré struck a chord that few African leaders have touched in recent years. Through major outlets and diaspora platforms that echo throughout Africa news coverage, Americans were not simply listening to another political statement from the Sahel. They were witnessing a generational shift. What made it resonate so strongly in the United States? The first reason is the story itself. Americans respect leaders who speak from personal experience, who rise from humble origins and speak openly about struggle. Traoré's account of being raised by a mother without electricity or clean water aligns with a timeless American ideal, the belief that dignity does not come from wealth, but from character. His story mirrors the narrative of countless immigrant families who overcame hardship to find opportunity in America. The second reason has to do with values. The United States has its own long history of women fighting for recognition, from the suffrage movement to the civil rights era to modern workplace reforms. When Traoré argued that the future of Burkina Faso depended on empowering women, many Americans recognized a familiar truth. They had seen it play out in their own society. And they know that nations grow stronger when the women within them rise. Policy analysts in Washington, think tanks and universities also paid close attention. They noted that his message directly challenged outdated Western narratives that often portray African women through a narrow lens of victimhood. By shifting the focus to leadership, resilience, and capability, Traoré's speech aligned with broader American research, showing that countries investing in women tend to be more stable, more democratic, and more prosperous. In that sense, Burkina Faso's message was not just morally compelling, it was strategically sound. Finally, many Americans simply appreciated hearing an African leader speak with confidence, not dependency. Traoré did not ask for aid, charity, or sympathy. Instead, he offered a vision, one in which women are recognized as the backbone of national strength. That tone of self-determination resonated deeply, especially among older American audiences who value responsibility, courage, and moral clarity. But America was not the only one listening. The international response revealed something even larger, a shift in the global conversation about African identity, women's leadership, and the future of the continent. Around the world, President Ibrahim Traoré's speech did not disappear into the constant flow of global headlines. Instead, it carved out a space of its own, prompting debate and reflection across continents. For many international observers, the message coming from Burkina Faso was more than a cultural statement. It was a political signal that Africa is reassessing its identity and redefining how it wants to be seen on the world stage. The African Union responded first, with several representatives publicly praising the speech as a necessary recalibration of continental priorities. They noted that for decades, development discussions focused heavily on infrastructure, trade routes, or foreign aid, while the role of women remained an afterthought. Traoré's approach, grounding national progress in human dignity, was seen as a refreshing and needed shift. Across multiple African news segments, analysts called this perspective the most honest recentering of African development in years. European reactions, however, were more complex. Some policymakers welcomed the message, especially those engaged in gender equality initiatives. Others viewed it cautiously, understanding that Traoré's tone hinted at a broader movement of African nations asserting independence from traditional Western influence. This tension was especially apparent in France, where commentators acknowledged the truth in Traoré's observations, yet sensed an undercurrent of critique toward past colonial narratives that shaped Western perceptions of African women. Global women's organizations, from grassroots activists to major international NGOs, reacted strongly and positively. They appreciated that an African head of state was not calling for charity, but for respect, opportunity, and representation. Many noted that his message aligned with long-standing global research. Societies empowering women tend to experience lower poverty rates, stronger governance, and more effective community resilience. International media outlets, including those watched closely by American audiences, also took notice. Some highlighted the tone of defiance, an African leader challenging the world to shift its lens. Others emphasized the moral clarity of the speech, describing it as one of the most sincere defenses of African womanhood to appear in global forums in recent years. The broader takeaway was unmistakable. Traoré did not simply describe the women of Burkina Faso, he reframed the narrative for an entire continent. And by doing so, he forced the world to reconsider something deeper. Who truly holds the power to shape Africa's future? But even that global reaction was not the final turning point. There was a twist, one that redefined this speech, not just as commentary, but as strategy. What many international observers failed to see, at least at first, is that President Ibrahim Traoré's message carried a hidden layer, one that went far beyond women's empowerment. On the surface, it was inspiring, but beneath that inspiration was a quiet confrontation with decades of global misunderstanding. And this is where the twist emerges. For generations, Western media portrayed African women through a narrow lens of suffering images that appeared on fundraising posters, charity campaigns, and crisis reports. These images shaped how Americans and Europeans imagined the continent, but Traoré challenged this image head-on. He declared that African women were not symbols of hardship, they were symbols of strength. They were not waiting for rescue, they were holding nations together with bare hands and unbreakable will. This is the twist the world did not expect. Traoré was not simply defending African women, he was correcting the world's perception of Africa itself. Through his speech, he reframed the story of Burkina Faso, and by extension the story of Africa, away from dependency and toward dignity, capability, and self-determination. He used women, the most overlooked population, as proof that Africa has always possessed the strength the world doubted. And when the message was replayed across Africa news, many analysts noticed something subtle but decisive. Traoré was teaching the world how Africa demands to be seen, not as tragic, not as helpless, but as powerful. Yet the real surprise lies ahead. Traoré's speech was not only cultural correction, it was a calculated repositioning of Burkina Faso on the global stage. As the world absorbed the emotional power of his message, a second twist slowly revealed itself, one that many political analysts now consider the most strategic part of President Ibrahim Traoré's speech. By placing African women at the center of national revival, Traoré did more than uplift a marginalized group. He repositioned Burkina Faso as a moral leader in a region often discussed only through the lens of conflict. In doing so, he redirected global attention away from narratives of instability and toward conversations about dignity, sovereignty, and the human foundations of nation-building. This was not accidental. It was a calculated redefinition of power. Rather than relying on traditional diplomacy or economic leverage, which Burkina Faso, like many African nations, cannot compete with, Traoré leveraged something far stronger: moral authority. He spoke in a way that no Western politician could dismiss. He aligned his message with global research, American values, and African heritage simultaneously. Through months of Africa news analysis, experts noted that Traoré established himself as a leader who does not ask the world for validation, he asserts it. This subtle shift changed the tone of international engagement. Instead of reacting to crises, Burkina Faso was now shaping narratives. Even more importantly, Traoré elevated himself as the voice of a new African generation, one that demands respect, not sympathy, partnership, not dependency. His speech used women as both proof and symbol of Africa's inherent strength. And with that, the world realized something unexpected. Traoré wasn't just defending African women, he was announcing the arrival of a new Africa and positioning Burkina Faso at its center. And now, with these revelations in place, we arrive at the final chapter, a conclusion meant to inspire, challenge, and leave the audience with a renewed sense of hope and responsibility. In the end, President Ibrahim Traoré did not simply deliver a speech, he delivered a reminder. A reminder that the strength of a nation is not found in its weapons, its politics, or its borders, but in the hearts of its people. And in Burkina Faso, as in so many parts of Africa, it is the women who carry that strength quietly, faithfully, and without recognition. His message, echoed across Africa news and throughout the global community, challenges us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Africa. It compels us to see African women not as victims of circumstance, but as leaders of destiny. It urges us to acknowledge that if women rise, communities rise. If women lead, nations stabilize. And if women are empowered, the future shifts. And perhaps the greatest truth of all is this: a continent cannot be rebuilt if half of its strength is left in the shadows. That is why Traoré's final sentiment resonates so deeply. We do not ask for permission to be free, we rise to claim it. So today, as we reflect on the significance of his words, we are left with a question that matters not only for Africa, but for all of us. Do you believe that the reforms championed by Ibrahim Traoré can truly reshape Burkina Faso and set an example for the entire continent? If this message touched you, share your thoughts below. If you believe truth matters more than headlines, subscribe for more stories like this. And if you feel the spirit of Africa rising, let your voice be part of that awakening.